I think Alabama has a big year. I'm a believer. I'm buying. I think they are a legitimate national championship contender in year number 2 for Kalen DeBoer. Hello and welcome in. It's always college football. I'm your host, Greg McElroy, and we appreciate you coming to us from wherever it is you're coming to us from. And we just felt like it was an appropriate time to dive into some SEC tiers. Now, last week, I was at SEC Media Days. The week before that, I was at Big 12 Media Days. So the last 2 weeks have been well-traveled, but time well spent, because I feel like I have a better sense for where the SEC is heading this upcoming week than I did had we tried to do this show last week. So instead, we had Johnny Manziel on, had a great conversation, spent the week diving into some of these teams, and now we feel like we can capably put together a list of teams 1 through 16 in the SEC and put them into tiers. If you guys are new to Always College Football, I always encourage you to subscribe to the podcast wherever you get the podcast. If you're here with us via the ESPN College Football YouTube channel, you can watch us there as well. You can follow the show, Always CFB, on both Instagram and on Twitter. You can also follow me at Greg McElroy if you'd like to do that as well. So a lot of places to be able to find the show and get the content. We're going to be clipping things out. We're going to be sending things out from this. But this is basically our SEC preview. We're not going to pick winners this year. Not right now, at least. We will here in a month or so when things get a little bit closer. We navigate through fall camp. We know who's starting where. Today is just tiers. We did this for the Big 12 last week. Had a lot of people watch it. A lot of people enjoy it. A lot of people weigh in. Today we're going to do the SEC. And I think this is one of my favorite shows of the entire year because, one, we could get it completely wrong, in which you guys would tell us how dumb we are. 2, we could nail it. You're still going to tell us how dumb we are. And 3, it might be somewhere in the middle, and you're still going to tell us how dumb we are, which is great. And we want you to weigh in. The SEC this year in particular, insanely intriguing contest. Because I look at it, I think there's a bunch of teams that can win the league. I think there's a handful of teams that can win the national championship. And unlike most leagues, there's very few teams that I think are legitimate works in progress. I think you have a bunch of teams that will go bowling, a bunch of teams that could play spoiler, and a bunch of teams that could absolutely make the college football playoff. So we will kick things off. Tier 1 national championship contenders, teams that can literally win the whole dang thing. Let's get it kicked off. We will start with the Texas Longhorns. They are anticipated by many to be as good as any team in all of college football this year, rightfully so. You look at what's back, you look at what they have on the recruiting trail, the momentum that Steve Sarkisian and his program has created, the coaching continuity that they have. I mean, all their coaches are back almost every year now. Pete Kwiatkowski's back on the defensive side for a million years. Steve Sarkisian continues to call the plays, same offensive line coach, and Kyle Flood. I mean, they have as good a continuity as just about anybody. So it's pretty remarkable to see year over year what is expected from the Horns. They've done a great job of navigating to the SEC, and going into this season, I think they have fewer questions than anyone in the entire league. We'll start with quarterback. What's funny is, as excited as we are for Arch Manning, rightfully, the guy's got talent, he's got pedigree, he's got everything you could possibly want. He is a legitimate question. He's never been the full-time starter before, but for all of us that have been around the game enough and watched him enough and the little bit of action he got last year, especially as the season went along, showcasing the mobility, the downfield throwing, and the supporting cast, he's going to be in a really good spot to be successful in year number 1. They have outstanding running back depth. Trey Wisner last year burst onto the scene, 1,000 yards in 2024, but now CJ Baxter is back healthy. You got Jarek Gibson in there as well. So you have depth at running back, which is really encouraging. You also absolutely have to love their entire defense from a star power standpoint. Now, are there some question marks on the interior of the defensive line that they had to address via the portal? Yeah, they've had crazy turnover at D tackle the last few years, but they go to the portal, they get some guys that have played Power 5 football in the past. So I happen to think those guys will be able to plug and play. Will they be difference makers? I don't know, but will they need to be? Not with what they have on both edges, where they have 5 or 6 guys off the edge. Colin Simmons, Anthony Hill, who's going to play second level, Ethan Burke, who's given them great reps for many, many years. They have great versatility on the edges of the defense. I think this group has a real chance to be as disruptive as any in the entire Southeastern Conference. I also like the secondary. Michael Taff is back. There's a lot to like there. There's a lot of pieces I think that they've added in the recruiting process over the last couple of years as well that could play early. I mean, last year, Colin Simmons is a true freshman. Anthony Hill's a true freshman. They have gotten freshmen on the field on defense for a number of years, and I think they should be pretty good. The areas that I am curious about, offensive line, it's somewhat of an unknown now. Trevor Gooseby, TJ Campbell, they've had guys that have played in spot duty, but they lost a lot. They lost their center. I think rebuilding those pieces up front offensively, especially with a relatively inexperienced quarterback, will be of the highest level of importance, but they have so much talent. They should be okay there regardless. We also know the schedule is, I think, much tougher this year than it was a year ago. You look at the marquee non-conference game against Ohio State. You look at tough road games in the SEC, road trip to Florida, road trip to Georgia, two teams that I think have a chance to be quite good. You look at the annual rivalry game against Oklahoma and the game that you'll play against Arkansas and the game that you play against A&M. All those games will be very, very difficult. Of course, Oklahoma's in Dallas. The other two will be in Austin. And the overall level of competition for Texas will be significant, but they are a national championship contender. Assuming Arch Manning is what we expect him to become, assuming the wide receivers are as good as we expect them to be, assuming the offensive line is not a liability. I don't think it will be. Will it be a position of dominance? I don't know about that. But I don't think the offensive line is going to be a liability whatsoever. And then all three levels defensively, I feel really confident in what they have coming back here in 25. So they are a national championship contender and are probably the team to beat right now in the Southeastern Conference. We'll move on to another national championship contender. Remember, this is tier 1. So these teams can all win the national championship. I'm going to the Alabama Crimson Tide. Now, Kalen DeBoer, year number 2. And if you look back at his tenure at Fresno, you look back at his tenure at Washington, the team takes a pretty significant jump from year number 1 to year number 2. Now, last year, people will point to the shortcomings and the inconsistencies. I don't anticipate that level of inconsistency this year. I think that last year, the highs were really, really high. I think back to the first half against Georgia, the whole game against LSU. But you also remember back to some of the lows. The Oklahoma performance was extremely disappointing. Vanderbilt, especially on the defensive side, very, very disappointing. So you look kind of over the course of all of last year, and there were moments where you just didn't get consistent output from both sides of the ball. Kalen DeBoer, though, in his press conference at SEC last year, addressed those things head on. He said, we've got to be better on third down. We got to be better on the road. We got to do a better job of managing situations. We got to be better in the red zone offensively. All the things that they came up short with last year, they are making that a huge priority this offseason. And I feel like Kalen DeBoer and the addition of Ryan Grubb, his new offensive coordinator, who's been with them for 13 years at the college level, dating all the way back to his time at Sioux Falls, that brain trust offensively should be in great shape. And then year 2 for Kane Womack calling the defensive shots, got to think that group from an identity standpoint will have a better understanding of the scheme that Kane Womack wants to run. I think both sides of the ball has better continuity. I think both sides of the ball has a better understanding of the philosophy adjustments that they had to endure last year and should be well equipped to move into this season feeling quite good. Let's talk about some positions of strength before we get to the question marks. Okay, running back, I think, has a chance to be a position of strength. Jam Miller has already shown that he can be a go-to guy. Richard Young is a guy that's going to get downhill, run extremely hard. Did get a little banged up last year, but expect him to be fully recovered. And Daniel Hill, those three guys there in the backfield can all be really good situationally depending on what the offense needs. I think wide receiver has a chance to be much better than it was a year ago. If you look at last year, it was Ryan Williams and a bunch of guys that kind of played at times a little out of position. Now they have very obvious roles and responsibilities. The addition of Isaiah Horton from Miami is going to give you that prototypical X wide receiver. It's going to be a possession guy, big body guy in the red zone that you can throw it in his direction, and he's going to go up and win those contested 50-50 balls. You have Ryan Williams. He now can move to a more traditional spot where he can play in the slot, but he can also play at the outside wide receiver on the strong side. He's going to be able to take the top off the defense just like he did last year. And then Jeremy Bernard, another year in development, another year of anticipating him kind of living in the slot and being a great football player for them. He was good last year, but now I think just another year of becoming a go-to guy he's going to be able to take a significant step forward. I also think the offensive line has a chance to be a position of strength. You bring back arguably the best center in college football in Parker Brailsford. You got a great left tackle in Caden Proctor. You have a great right guard in Jaden Roberts. Now there's competition at the left guard spot. There's competition at the right tackle spot. But they feel like their depth is better this year than it was a year ago. And then on the defensive side, they should be rock solid. Now, they're a little thin in a few spots. They don't have as many bodies as they once did. Talking back in 2016, 2018, the depth of those rosters when they go 8, 9, 10 deep along the defensive line, those days are long gone. But their starting 11 should be very, very good, headlined by the linebackers, Justin Jefferson, who's got great speed, and Deontay Lawson, who has legitimate All-American capability, assuming he can stay healthy. They have to stay healthy, but they should feel pretty good about what they have. And then last year, if you think back, we were having this conversation about youth in the secondary. They at times had to rely on 3 true freshmen on the field at a time in the secondary. That is no more. All those guys that played a bunch early on, they have now blossomed into year 2 players, and we should expect a pretty big jump collectively from that group across the board. They're healthier, they should be in a better spot, and they'll have a better understanding of what Kane Womack wants to do from a defensive coverage and disguise standpoint. Let's get to the question marks. Quarterback. Very obvious question mark. We've been talking about quarterback competitions for weeks and weeks and weeks. Alabama might have as intriguing competition as there is. Ty Simpson, as of this moment, is the front runner, but he's got to go and secure the job in the fall. He's always had talent. He's always had athleticism. He's always been accurate on the deep ball, but now it's about belief. It's about understanding situations and distributing the ball where it needs to go, depending on what the defense dictates. But you do not want to lose sight of what Austin Mack might be able to do. Big, 6'6", 235-pound guy that can really throw the ball downfield. And then the outrageously talented true freshman Keelan Russell, who you need to keep an eye on. The longer this competition goes, the more realistic it becomes for Keelan Russell to potentially find his way on the field in meaningful moments this fall. So that's a 3-way battle right now that I think could be very intriguing as we move a little bit closer to that week 1 game against Florida State. Also a little concerned about the pass rush. Who's going to be the go-to guy? Now, I think Quay Russaw has all the ability in the world to be that guy, but now he's got to go out there and do it. He's got really good, solid pieces on the interior that should be able to help stop the run, but on obvious passing situations, who's the guy that can go get his own shot and apply pressure single-handedly? That's a big question that they need to iron out as well. Across the board, though, you look at Bama, I think they are in a really good spot. Tight end, a question mark as well, but one that I think can be overcome with some of the veterans that they brought in. Probably not going to be guys that blow the stat sheet up, but they're going to be solid and do what they're asked to do within the confines of the offensive system. You look at the schedule, very tough. At Florida State, I think it's a dangerous game. Tough game for sure. Florida State, they've had that one circled for the last 2 years. I think they'll have a couple tricks up their sleeve too. So that's a tricky game in week 1. You go to Georgia. That is on September 27th. You have Tennessee at your house on the 3rd Saturday in October. You got LSU at your house on November 8th. Will be a huge game between another team that I think can potentially make a significant run this year. Oklahoma comes to you as well. Another game in Tuscaloosa. Noticing a trend here, a lot of their more difficult games are in the friendly confines of Bryant-Denny Stadium before they finish up in the Iron Bowl by taking a trip across the state to play against the Auburn Tigers. I think Alabama has a big year. I'm a believer. I'm buying. I think they are a legitimate national championship contender in year number 2 for Kalen DeBoer. We'll go next to the Georgia Bulldogs. And this is going to be an elite team. They've been an elite team for a number of years. But what I'm most excited about with this roster is it feels a little bit more blue collar than it's been the last few years. Like, I feel like they kind of got away from the pound you, run the football type of identity that we came to expect from Kirby Smart in his first 7-8 years as the head coach of the Georgia Bulldogs. I look at them last couple of years, they became a little bit more pass happy. Understandably, Carson Beck was really comfortable just standing there in the pocket and throwing darts all over the field. But the receivers were disappointing. The offensive line, because of injury, had some inconsistencies. And as a result, their defense was left on the field a few too many plays. And I think it kind of took its toll at times against certain competition. I think coaching stability is huge. I think Mike Bobo is going to do a nice job because they're going to get back to becoming more of a ground and pound outfit. That should help the offensive line. That should help the young quarterback, Gunnar Stockton. And it'll take some of the pressure off the receivers that have been a little inconsistent the last couple of years. Let's talk about strengths. I think defensively, they're going to be really, really good. I know at linebacker, they have an elite group. Really, really good. You got Raylan Wilson, you got CJ Allen, you got guys that you absolutely know that you can rely on, and they're going to always have one or two more guys that we don't even talk about at this point, but they put them in third down situations, and those guys cause a lot of problems with their pass rush. I like the interior of the defensive line. It's not as deep as it once was, but still the frontline players are extremely talented, and I love the addition of Elo Medozi from Army. This is a guy that flashed at times last year, kind of flew under the radar a little bit. His off-season transfer to Georgia has not been quite as celebrated as some of the other edge rushers that have signed elsewhere, but that's a name you need to remember. Elo Medozi, a guy that they're very, very bullish on. I think the offensive line is going to be a position of strength. Last year, they were completely banged up. Ernest Green now moves back to right tackle. Monroe Freeling will hold down the left tackle spot. They've got guys that they've been rotating in at both center and at guard the last couple of years. They should be just fine on the interior of the offensive line, assuming they can stay healthy. And I still really like some of the additions they made at wide receiver. I think Noah Thomas gives you length on the perimeter. I think Zachariah Branch gives you explosiveness. They like to throw all those little screens, get it in his hands, see what he does with it. So really excited about what he might do. And then Nate Frazier, assuming he can hold on to the football this year, he might be in a really good spot to become one of the better backs in the SEC by season's end. Question marks. Gunnar Stockton. Now, I really like this young man. I think he's tough. I think he's physical. I think he's going to run the ball, but he's got to be smart too. He can't lower his shoulder and expect to run the gauntlet of the SEC by getting 10, 12 touches a game in the quarterback run game. He's got to be smart. You also, I think, have to worry about some injuries because injuries have become a little bit of an issue for Georgia the last couple of years, but they should be strong pretty much all over the board. Now it's about getting back to the identity that we have long expected when we turn on a Georgia football game. Schedule's tough. They're at Tennessee early. That'll be a tricky game. Bama comes to them. Texas comes to them. They're at Auburn in a game that I think will probably fly under the radar a little bit nationally this time of year. But any Georgia fan knows that when you go to Jordan-Hare, it's an extremely difficult place to go play. Ole Miss, Florida, at Georgia Tech, even though that's a little bit of a neutral site game. You have a bunch of very difficult games, possible slip-ups, but I think this Georgia team collectively has a chance to be better than they were the last 2 years. And 2 years ago, that team was outrageously good. They just didn't have their best stuff in the biggest game of the year against Alabama in the SEC championship game. So do not be surprised whatsoever if Georgia's back in the mix and potentially brings home a third national championship in the Kirby Smart era here in 25. We'll go next to the fourth team and final team that I'll put in tier one from the SEC, and that's the LSU Tigers. Now, a lot of people have very mixed feelings about what LSU could be this year. I happen to be in the camp that believes they can go and beat, play with, play up to, in some cases, maybe even play down to the level of the competition week in and week out. It starts at the quarterback spot. Garrett Nussmeier has played a lot of football. I think he has a better understanding of what he needs to do situationally than he did last year. I think last year, look, he's a gunslinger, and he's trying to replace a Heisman Trophy winner. That's no easy task. To stay within yourself, to stay within the offense, to stay within the situation. Instead, he was always trying to make the highlight reel throw, make the highlight reel play, prove to everyone in college football that he can play to the same level as Jaden Daniels did the year before. That's not necessary. I think he's comfortable in his own skin, and he returns, I think, an outrageously good supporting cast. I think they're so deep at wide receiver, and there are people kind of flying under the radar nationally that are as good at their position as just about anybody in the sport. It starts with Aaron Anderson in the slot. Guy is really dynamic. You got Chris Hilton, who's at times banged up last year, but he's got great vertical ability, and you bring in a couple of really dynamic transfers. One in Barry and Brown from Kentucky, who's excellent, not just in the return game, but also at times, assuming he catches the football, he's been dynamic as a wide receiver as well. And then Nick Anderson transfers down from Oklahoma, little banged up last year, but 2 years ago, he was one of the better freshman receivers in the entire game. The big question, I think, is on defense and along the offensive line. Offensive line, they lose 2 tackles from last year. They had a bunch of guys that played a lot of football for them. They're now having to replace those pieces. And hey, guess what? Week 1, let's throw those brand new tackles out. Let's throw that new offensive line out against one of the better defensive fronts in the country in the Clemson Tigers. And hey, you know what? Let's do it on silent count too, because we're going to be on the road. very difficult spot to start the season. We're going to find out everything we need to know about LSU's offensive line in the first 20 minutes of that football game. Then you go to the defensive side. This defensive group actually took significant strides last year. Now, they're nowhere yet near being able to play at a championship caliber, but they went from 108th last year to 61st. Assuming Blake Baker's system is even more ingrained this year, I think you can expect an even bigger jump on that side of the ball. If you look at those improvements, I think that has a chance to be one of the more improved defenses in the SEC this year. You go out and add some key pieces like Braylon Moore. You go out and add another key piece like Josh Thompson. You will go out and kind of build things around. That's along the offensive line, defensive line. You got Patrick Payton. Whit Weeks is back. He's going to be fully healthy. Harold Perkins is sliding to a more natural position where he's a little bit on the edge, but will also play a little bit at linebacker. And they'll be able to utilize the athleticism that they've been able to kind of generate in recruiting. And that athleticism in this style of defense could be very advantageous. You're going to have movement, you're going to have stunts, you're going to have pressures, you're going to have things that will be coming from all different directions against the opposing quarterback. And because of the speed that they'll be able to put on the field, this group has a chance to take a huge step. I also think the schedule is very difficult. When you look all the way through it, at Alabama, at Ole Miss, A&M comes to you. You kick off the season by going to Clemson, very, very difficult. You also have to go to Oklahoma, a team that I'm very bullish on this year. And then you have some very difficult home games against South Carolina, against Florida, and the Battle of the Boot against Arkansas, another very dangerous game there for the LSU Tigers. But I really think the stars have kind of aligned. It feels like Brian Kelly and company have kind of pushed all their chips to the middle of the table for this season. This is the year where they need to make a run. And I really believe they can with some of the pieces they've added, both at wide receiver, on defense, another year in that defensive system, and along the offensive line, centered around the playmaking ability of Garrett Nussmeier. Now let's go to Tier 2 teams in the SEC. These are teams that I don't know if they can win the national championship, but I absolutely believe they can make the college football playoff and potentially be a factor in the SEC championship race. And we'll kick things off with the Oklahoma Sooners. This is a team that so many people have very mixed feelings on. People talk about the addition of John Mateer. They're questioning whether or not Mateer's playmaking ability can translate from Washington State, where he played a substandard schedule, to the SEC. I am in the camp that believes he can elevate very easily to this level of football. I think he's the real deal. I think he's one of the best quarterbacks in the country and should immediately provide a huge boost to an offense that at times last year was outrageously inconsistent. I also look at the defensive line. The defensive line goes 5 deep at defensive tackle. They have great edges. I mean, really, really good edges. You bring over Marvin Jones from Florida State, was at Georgia before that, very talented guy to pair with R. Mason Thomas. Now you have great edge defenders on either side. And the defensive tackle group, like I said, it's the best in the SEC. I think it's the best defensive line overall in the SEC. So when we're thinking about contenders, great places to start are at quarterback and along the defensive line. I think they check both those boxes. I also look at some of the returning production. They bring back about 70% of their overall production this past season. That's huge. You get a little bit more experience along the offensive line. You have really good playmakers at wide receiver. No one remembers Deion Burks, but going into last season, we were talking about him as one of the best playmakers in the country after he transferred down from Purdue. He just caught the injury bug last year that never really worked out. So there are things to adjust. There are things to consider. The schedule's a beast. But if you look at everything that Oklahoma has going for them this year, they should be in a really good spot. Should be great at the second level defensively. I really like their linebackers. Maybe a couple question marks in the secondary, but if they can rush the passer the way I anticipate them rushing the passer, they should be just fine. They're in the back end defensively. Offensive line was a huge question mark last year. I can't imagine that group is going to be as inconsistent as they were in 2024 here in 2025. Let's talk about the schedule. Michigan, week 2, massive. Absolutely massive. They got to get that game. It's a huge opportunity for them. It could give them some momentum heading into conference play where things get even more difficult. They're at Bama. They're at South Carolina. They're at Tennessee. All 3 of those teams, I think, are really, really capable. And then at home, you get LSU, Ole Miss, Missouri, and Auburn. All 4 of those teams, I think, are very dangerous in the SEC. And then, of course, you get Texas, who I think might be the best team in the league. You get them in the neutral site in the Red River rivalry. I think Oklahoma is going to be a huge factor this year. Now, will they ultimately contend? I don't know, but I could see this team getting to 9-3. I could see this team even getting to 10-2 potentially if the stars align the way I anticipate them aligning. We'll go next to the Auburn Tigers, who I'm not sure there's a team in the SEC that I anticipate improving more year over year than the Auburn Tigers. I think their personnel is significantly better. I look at their offensive line. That unit was solidified kind of down the stretch last year, and they went out and added some nice pieces in the portal to only bolster what they already had. I love what they have at wide receiver. You can make a case it might be the best wide receiver group, top to bottom, in the entire SEC. We know what Cam Coleman is, but the addition of Eric Singleton is enormous for Auburn as far as giving you that threat that is always a threat to get behind the defense and create a big play. The big question, I think, do have some key pieces to be replaced on defense. I'm just not that concerned about it. If you look at what they bring back, Keldrick Falk is back on the edge. You get a bunch of guys that I think have played in the past, maybe not in featured roles, but they've played enough to make me feel like they're going to be in a pretty good spot there for sure. I think the big question mark with Auburn is quarterback. Jackson Arnold comes over from Oklahoma. It didn't work out at Oklahoma. And this is going to be a little bit of a difficult transition, I think, to an offense that is quarterback friendly, but does require split-second decisions by the quarterback after the ball is snapped. And for a guy that at times has been a little bit turnover prone, and a guy that at times has shown maybe not the most confidence in his own ability, this could be a more intriguing storyline than we're probably willing to address right now. I think they're going to run Jackson Arnold. I think quarterback run games could be a big part of what they do. They've gone out and they've gotten depth at that position as well. So in the event in which he gets a little banged up, they have other pieces to be utilized in this offense led by Hugh Freeze. So I think this team has a chance to improve greatly. I think the schedule's tough, like it always is. You got tough road game at Oklahoma. You're at A&M. You're at Arkansas. You're at Vandy. Vandy has had Auburn and Hugh Freeze's number for the last few years. Not necessarily Vandy, but Diego Pavia, more specifically. He beat him at Liberty. He beat him in year one at New Mexico State when he was at Auburn, and they got him last year. So I think those are some tough road games. You get some home games in Alabama and Georgia. They're in the friendly confines of Jordan-Hare. That's enormous. But maybe the biggest game on the schedule is the tone setter. It's week one. It's against Baylor. It's on the road. I think Baylor's got a chance to be a real threat. And the Big 12, it would go a long way for the Big 12 to get a marquee non-conference win against an SEC team. And Baylor might have the goods after a 6-game winning streak down the stretch of last season to potentially pull off what would be a big stunner. They're in week number one. I think Auburn can absolutely make a run. They're a momentum team. If they get hot early, look out. They're going to play better and better and better as the season goes along. But keep a close eye on their quarterback, Jackson Arnold. If he plays up to his potential, this team is absolutely a playoff contender. If he plays the way he played last year, this team's going to have some of the same issues in 25 as they did in 24. Bad situationally with pivotal turnovers at the worst possible time. Let's go next to a team that not enough people are talking about, and that's the Florida Gators. Now, you're going to look, and so much of the conversation surrounding Florida is about the schedule. The schedule. What people are not talking enough about is how good they might be along both the offensive and defensive lines. Okay, that's a great starting point in this league. The offensive line returns depth, they return talent, and they return an identity. It's going to be a team that runs the football. They might hand the ball off to Jaden Baugh 25, 30 times in the game. Their running back at 230 pounds is going into his second year. They can also spell him. They got great depth at running back. This is going to be a team that is a ground and pound outfit, which is going to allow the talent of DJ Lagway to come to the forefront. Their quarterback's phenomenal. He's especially good on the downfield throws. And if they run the ball the way I anticipate them running the football, that's going to help their defense tremendously. And it's going to force a lot of teams to be very cognizant when it comes to stopping the run. You know what's good for a quarterback when teams are thinking about the run game? Boom. Heavy play action, throw it over the top, strike up the fight song for the Florida Gators. I think this has a chance to be a very potent offensive attack. Now, they do have to replace some key pieces at wide receiver. They did go out, I think, made some great adjustments and went out and got some really quality pieces at the wide receiver spot. Jamel Kosturtevant comes over. They think they have some young guys they're very, very excited about at wide receiver. So I think wide receiver is not really a position group that I'm super concerned about. There is maybe a little bit of a concern in the secondary, but this defensive line, headlined by Caleb Banks, they have a chance to really be impactful with their pass rush. If you have a great defensive tackle that can take over games, it's a pretty good starting point, and Caleb Banks can absolutely be that. Now let's address the elephant in the room, right? The elephant in the room is the schedule. That's the ticket. Doesn't matter how good you feel about Florida, how many teams can navigate this schedule and avoid the obvious potholes? You got at Miami in the non-conference. You also play against Florida State. Those are two teams that I think both have a chance to be pretty dang good here in 2025. The SEC road games are a beast. You're at LSU, you're at A&M, Kentucky, and that game's a little bit later in the year. Could be cold, could be challenging. You know that's kind of Kentucky's Super Bowl and has been for the last few years. You're also at Ole Miss, a team that's probably trying to exact revenge after Florida kicked them out of the playoffs last year. And then at home, you get Texas, brutal. You get Tennessee, brutal. And then you have that neutral site game against Georgia there in Jacksonville every single year. The schedule is an absolute beast. But if they can run the ball the way I anticipate them being able to run the ball, and the offensive line is as good as advertised, and the defensive line is as good as advertised, and Lagway takes the steps that we expect him to take at quarterback, Florida's going to be a problem. I really believe that. Now, the schedule will be a beast, but can they cause some serious headaches for a lot of teams in what might become a bare-knuckle brawl every single time you play them? Yes. The answer is a resounding yes. And if you can win the physical battle in the SEC, you're always going to have a chance. So I am a little higher on Florida than some other people might be. We'll go next to another team that I think is flying under the radar, and that's the Texas A&M Aggies. If you look at some of the buzz that's being created about Texas A&M, there's not enough attention being paid to what they might have back on the offensive line. They can go 7-8 deep along the offensive line. They have 7 guys that were in their top 7 from a year ago. They're all back. They have 2 centers. How many teams have 2 centers, right? They have depth at tackle. They have depth at guard. They're in a really good spot to be a team that could impose their will while trying to run the football, which is great because Marcel Reed, their quarterback, they kind of need him to take the next step. If this team's going to go from being a team that's just slightly over 500 to a team that's now in the playoff discussion, they're going to have their quarterback play at a high level from week 1 all the way through week 12. They have great production returning. They bring back 70% of their offense. They bring back 73% of their defense, which is kind of amazing too when you think about all the pieces that were lost along the defensive line. To think that they bring back nearly 3/4 of their production is a pretty good spot to be in from a tackle standpoint, from an interception standpoint, from a disruption standpoint. So I think that group along the defensive front, probably the biggest question mark for me, but they are not worried about what they have back. They think that group actually has a chance to be just as good as they were a year ago, even though it won't have the same star power that they had on the 2024 team. I look at the skill position. Casey Concepcion is a guy that is not getting nearly enough credit. Transferring over from NC State, I think he was one of the gems of the transfer portal cycle. The last couple of years at NC State, they had some up and down quarterback play. I think Casey Concepcion featured on a team that is going to heavily emphasize trying to control the line of scrimmage and run the football is going to be in a great spot. He's going to get a lot of one-on-ones. He's going to get a lot of opportunities there in the slot, and he's going to make a lot of plays for the Aggies this upcoming season because this team is going to run through the running back room. Le'Veon Moss is back after getting banged up down the stretch, but at one point he was probably the most physical runner in the entire SEC. You also bring back Reuben Owens, who was lost early in the season last year in preseason camp. Never really got to see what he was able to do, but he was a 5-star blue chip prospect just a couple years ago. You got Amari Daniels, who's still very, very solid as kind of your change of pace back. I do think there's a couple things you got to watch for. Consistency in the passing game, which I think is reasonable. Assuming Marcel Reed takes that step, I think that has a chance to be not a problem for the Aggies this upcoming year. And then Colin Klein, his comfort level, his understanding as the offensive coordinator, his understanding of the SEC. I can do this against this team. I can't do this against this team. I think he is more well-equipped in year number 2 as the OC to put together a game plan that can best exploit what the opposing defense might be able to do. I feel like it's rinse and repeat. The schedule's always tough. In this league, top to bottom, it's as good as you'll find in all of college football. They're at LSU, they're at Texas, they're at Missouri, they're at Arkansas. These are very difficult spots. You also get Notre Dame in the non-conference. That game, I would imagine the Aggies probably have that one circled. Who wouldn't go into South Bend's incredible opportunity? Then you get Auburn at home, Florida at home, and South Carolina at home. So you get a couple of very tough matchups at home. You have a bunch of really tough matchups on the road, and that pivotal marquee non-conference game against the Irish could take their season to the next level. We'll go next to the South Carolina Gamecocks, who broke through last year in pretty amazing fashion. I love what South Carolina was able to do down the stretch last year. I love the growth and development that we saw from Lenora Sellers from year one throughout that campaign. The guy he was in week one compared to the guy he was playing against Clemson, night and day different. You could tell the confidence was rising on a week-to-week basis. You could tell the accuracy was getting better from a week-to-week standpoint. And last year, it was just flat-out playmaking ability. And at times, he had to do it kind of on his own. The receivers last year were a bit of a question mark. They were a little up and down. They had guys in and out of the lineup. They had guys that were inconsistent catching the football. They were guys that were inconsistent with their route depths and things like that. Now that group should be another year older, another year more developed. Nick Harbor hopefully will reach his potential this year. He didn't run track this offseason, focused exclusively on football. Here's hoping he can have his best season in a Gamecock uniform here in 2025. And I love the development of Mazio Bennett. I think he's got a chance to be a premier slot in the slot there for Lenora Sellers. Do have to figure out what they're going to do about tight end. They lost a great one last year in Josh Simon, and the offensive line should be solid as well. The big questions for South Carolina, I think, are on the defensive side. Look, Dylan Stewart is a great starting point. Probably the best edge defender in the entire SEC. You can make a case he might be the best defensive end prospect in all of college football, but he can't do it on his own. They lost 4 or 5 great defensive linemen that took some of the pressure off of him last year. Now he's going to get the full attention of every single offense that he plays. They lost great depth and experience at the second level. They lost great depth and experience in some spots on their third level in their back end. But I still believe the identity that Clayton White, their defensive coordinator, what he's already created, I'm just not that concerned about that group top to bottom. They should be rock solid. Will they be as good as last year? I don't know. But I still think they have a chance to be one of the better groups in the country by season's end. Interesting schedule, by the way. 2 non-conference games. One's a neutral site against Virginia Tech, who I think has a chance to be dangerous. That's week 1. You also have the game against Clemson, who might be one of the best teams in the country at season's end. All right, that game is at home, so that will be somewhat helpful for the Gamecock faithful. But you look at their brutal SEC road slate. They're at LSU, at Ole Miss, at A&M, at Missouri. All right, 4 very difficult road games there for South Carolina. And then at home, they get Alabama and Oklahoma. Kentucky also comes to them. So very tough schedule for South Carolina, but I think their offense has a chance to be one of the better groups in the SEC. Now it's just about the defense. Can they be comparable to what they were last year? Because if they are, they're a legitimate playoff contender. If they take a big step back, then they become more of a dangerous team and then become a legitimate playoff contender. So we will see. It'll be worth watching there very closely early on, especially against Virginia Tech in week 1. We're going to learn all we need to know about what that defense might be capable of. Moving next to the Missouri Tigers. I also have them in the playoff contending category. Part of why I feel like they have a chance is I think the schedule is a little bit more manageable for Missouri than most of the other teams in the SEC. They have a really good transfer portal class. They kind of have that reload mentality. When you talk to Eli Drinkwitz and what they've tried to attract, they go out and they go get guys that have played high-level football at other places, and in some cases have been playing football for 6, 7, 8 years. A couple guys, one guy in their secondary in particular, I think he's played for 4 different teams, and I think he's in year 7 of college football. So they've been around. They have a really solid defense. I like what they have back on that side. They bring back 8 starters on that side of the ball. You got some big-time difference makers. Damon Wilson transfers over from Georgia. He might be an elite edge presence for them as he kind of tries to figure out where exactly he's going to impact games on a week-to-week basis. And then you look at the quarterback spot. That's the big question mark for me. Eli Drinkwitz have gone out and said, hey, yeah, we all thought it was going to be Bo Pribula, the transfer from Penn State. That's not necessarily 100% determined just yet. Sam Horn is also a guy that's going to be factoring into that decision. So that competition continues. If it's Pribula, you can anticipate pretty athletic quarterback, a guy that can utilize quarterback run, whose mobility can create big problems for the opposing defense. If it's Horn, then you would probably think it's going to be a little bit more drop back pass. Guy that can kind of stretch the field vertically and kind of carve you up underneath with the passing attack. Question mark, offensive line. Also a little bit of a question mark. They lost a bunch of really good players off that group from a year ago, but their system is one that should not force this offensive line to be put in a really difficult spot. They do a great job with misdirection and stretching the defense horizontally. I love the addition of Ahmad Hardy at running back. He should be really, really solid as he transfers up from Louisiana Monroe. But I really think that this group has a chance to be very dangerous this year, and they're probably not getting the love that they probably need to get. You got a nice non-conference game in Kansas. You'll get to know exactly where you're at there in what should be a rivalry game. Welcome back, Kansas and Missouri. Glad to have it back on the schedule here in 2025. At home, you get Bama, you get A&M, you get Mississippi State, you get South Carolina. If you can get 3 of those 4, a pretty good spot to start. Going to be tough to get 3 of those 4, but it's not out of the realm of possibility if they can potentially take care of business at home. They also have to go to Oklahoma, another rivalry game. They're at Auburn. Should be a very difficult game on the road in Jordan-Hare. You're at Arkansas. You're at Vanderbilt. So you kind of look at everything. The schedule is not impossible, but it's also not easy. Missouri could be a team that at season's end, the record reflects greatness, whereas they've just taken care of business against teams that they should have taken care of business against. Still in Tier 2. Here we are. We are now 10 teams in to the SEC race, and everybody's in either Tier 1 or Tier 2. Well, Tier 2 continues on. Remember, Tier 2, national championship contenders, that's Tier 1. Tier 2 are college football playoff contenders. And we'll move on now to the Ole Miss Rebels. I think Ole Miss is going to be super dynamic offensively. I think they're going to score a ton of points. I love their quarterback, Austin Simmons. He's got great arm talent, really, really flexible in the shoulder, can make any throw. Great arm angles. We saw him thrust into action last year against Georgia in what was a difficult situation in the rain against one of the top defenses in the country when his quarterback, Jackson Dart, got banged up, missed a series. He goes right in, leads him down the field. This kid's ready for the primetime spotlight, and he's got a great supporting cast to lean on. I think Trey Wallace, the addition from Penn State, is huge. I love what he might provide to that group. Kalen Lee at slot receiver is one of the better slots that you'll see in the entire SEC. I also think John Stribling, transfer, who's been kind of all over the place, but he's got a chance to play now in an offense that is very, very helpful for a guy with his type of skill set. And then you look at the tight end group. I think they're going to be dynamic at tight end. I really like what they have at that position. The big question for Ole Miss is along the offensive line. That was a position that was not necessarily a liability, but far from a position of strength last year. And then you look at what they have defensively. I love what they have at linebacker in Suntaran Perkins. I love what they have in TJ Daugherty. I think they should be fine in the back end, but man, they lost a lot of great players off that defensive front. To lose a Walter Nolan, to lose guys on the edges, it's going to be hard for them to replicate what they had on that side of the ball last year. Remember last year, this is one of the best defenses in all of college football. They were at one point number 1 in sacks, number 1 in stopping the run, and rushing yards per game given up. So this team overachieved last year. If Pete Golden, the defensive coordinator, can just somehow not fall off a cliff on that side of the ball, this team becomes remarkably dangerous here in 25. Tough schedule. I think it's tougher this year than it was a year ago. They're at Georgia. They're at Oklahoma. They're at Kentucky. They're at Mississippi State. Mississippi State, of course, the Egg Bowl rivalry game. That's one that Mississippi State's had circled for sure. At home, you get LSU, you get Florida, you get Arkansas, you get South Carolina. Like the LSU game's brutal. The Florida game's brutal. Those road games that I referenced already, very, very difficult. And then you look, too, at some of their non-conference games. Interesting non-conference schedule. I think Tulane will be a handful. I think Washington State has a chance to be a team that's kind of dangerous. I don't think Ole Miss will have their hands full with them, but definitely a unique matchup there, kind of in the middle of the season, middle of the schedule, where Ole Miss needs to be prepared because that could be one of the bigger games on Washington State's schedule, a huge opportunity for that program to go to an SEC environment and potentially pull off a bit of a stunner. I think Ole Miss, if things can be what I expect them to be offensively, they can get into a lot of shootouts. They can win a lot of games. They just have to make sure that defensively they don't fall off a cliff from where they were a year ago. If they don't, they'll be back in the mix for a college football playoff conversation. Finally, in tier number 2, it's the Tennessee Volunteers. Tennessee is one of those teams that's one of the biggest unknowns in the entire SEC. We don't know exactly what things are going to look like at quarterback. We think Joey Aguilar 2 years ago at Appalachian State had a really good year, was rock solid. Last year, it wasn't so good. Tried to do a little too much, took a few too many risks. Maybe he can now get back in a quarterback-friendly system to playing rock solid football. I also think the offensive line is a little bit of a question mark. They lose a lot of key pieces. Now, they've reinforced with top blue chip talent in some cases, but you lose some identity, especially with the loss of Cooper Mays, their center. He was excellent last year. And in this offense where they want to play with tempo and the center is required to do an awful lot, having a guy that's slightly less experienced there is less than desirable. I still think they're going to be great at running back, even though Dylan Sampson is gone. I still like what they have at wide receiver. I think they should be just fine there. I am also going to be curious to see how things work out along the front seven defensively. I think they're really good at linebacker, but there's some star power loss with James Pierce off to the NFL. I don't think that's a group, though, that's going to fall off a cliff. I expect the defensive line at Tennessee to still play at a really high level. I just don't know if it'll be a game-changing group like it was a year ago. There are a couple question marks, like I referenced: quarterback, offensive line. Those are things that I'm curious about. I'm also curious a little bit about Jermod McCoy, their outstanding corner. He tore his ACL early in the season. If he's not at 100%, that could be problematic as the season continues to move forward. Some marquee games. You got Georgia at home early. You got Oklahoma. That'll be an interesting game. That's at home as well. Arkansas. Can you get revenge against the Razorbacks this year? You also get Vanderbilt at home in the season finale. You're at Bama. You're at Florida. That'll be an interesting game on the road at Bama naturally. And then at Florida, a team that I think is going to be very, very physical. You're also at Mississippi State. You're at Kentucky before you also get Syracuse in the non-conference. That's a neutral site game, but Syracuse is kind of a big question mark as well. In week one, if for whatever reason the defense isn't operating at full tilt, maybe Syracuse can score some points and make that one interesting there in Atlanta. But I think Tennessee, if they can adequately replace the pieces lost along the offensive line, and Joey Aguilar can look like he did in 23 as opposed to 24, this team will remain a problem in the Southeastern Conference. We'll go next to tier number 3, and these are teams that I kind of qualify as spoilers. Teams that can beat pretty much anybody on their schedule, but probably aren't in position just yet to challenge at the top of the league. So I don't view these teams as playoff contenders, but I think they could be a massive problem if you catch them on the wrong day. We'll start with Vanderbilt. We learned that last year. We know what Diego Pavia is all about. We know what Clark Lee is all about. I think this group actually has a chance to be a little bit more legitimate. Clark Lee even said to the media last week at Media Days, hey, we think we're more talented than last year. We caught some people off guard last year. Our offensive system is a difficult one to prepare for, and we would imagine we have the nation's attention this year. So now it's about on 3rd and 1, and we know we're handing it off to Cedric Alexander inside. We can get the necessary yardage without having to fool people with motion, tricks, and things like that. I think that's the next step of Vanderbilt's development. They should be really good up front defensively. They bring back a lot of personnel there. They got to get better along the offensive line. They're never going to be a top flight unit, but hopefully that group can grow across the board to be a little bit more impactful up front. Diego Pavia is the straw that stirs the drink. I mean, he is absolutely everything you could possibly want as a quarterback if you are the Vanderbilt Commodores. He's tough. He's accurate. He can at times be a bit streaky, but you catch him on the wrong day, he is a huge problem for the opposing defense. I also think he gives them a belief. Every time he steps on the field, he believes he's going to win, and he gives a ton of belief to the rest of his teammates as well the second they step out there and start making some plays. Now, a few things they can improve. They got to get better with the pass rush. All right, they got to be a little bit more efficient offensively as opposed to the boomer bust nature from time to time. But you look at their schedule, and like I said, I don't expect Vanderbilt to be in competition at the top of the SEC standings. But can they beat Alabama? They did last year. Can they beat Texas? Potentially. Diego turned it over a million times last year. If he doesn't turn it over, maybe that's a different ballgame. At South Carolina, can they knock off South Carolina on the road? Can they knock off Tennessee in the season finale? Can they get LSU at home? Can they get Missouri at home? Can they get Auburn at home? They've beaten Auburn last year. Diego Pavia has beaten Auburn 3 times, or beaten Hugh Freeze 3 times in his career. Can they do it again here in 25? And then they get Kentucky as well. They also go to Virginia Tech in the non-conference. So I think Vandy continues to be a sneaky team in the SEC. I expect them to go bowling. I expect them to be a problem and probably pull off at least 1, maybe 2 upsets this upcoming season. We'll go next to the Arkansas Razorbacks, who not a lot of people are talking about Arkansas right now. But with quarterback Talon Green, you always have a chance. This guy is dynamic. He's now in year number 2 in Bobby Petrino's system. I think the offensive line has a chance to go from becoming a huge question mark to a group that can be solid across the board. I also think they have great depth at linebacker with Xavier Sori and Steven Dix. Like, they have guys that you can rely on. Now, there are some questions because of just how much of an overhaul this has been. This is a ton of new pieces that are going to be filling into their rotation. They also lost some great weapons last year offensively. Losing all those great weapons at wide receiver and at tight end is not something that will be easy to replace. And they went out and they got guys that have played college football before, but not necessarily all played college football together. You also worry about the secondary. The secondary's been a little bit of a problem for a number of years, so I'll be a little curious to see exactly where that goes. But if Taylor Green can take a step, if the offensive line can gel, if the wide receivers can play up to their potential, and the defense can kind of absorb some of the losses and those linebackers can erase some big plays being created, this team becomes dangerous. They beat Tennessee last year. They gave some team fits last year. They gave Texas some fits last year. I wouldn't be surprised if they caused some problems for some teams again this season. Plenty of opportunities to pull off some upsets. Notre Dame comes to them in the non-conference. At Ole Miss, at Tennessee, at LSU, at Texas. Those are 4 games that are massive, all on the road, but all should not be taken lightly by those teams I just listed. You get A&M at home. You get Auburn at home. You get Mississippi State and you get Missouri at home as well. I think Arkansas is going bowling, and I think they'll pull off an upset or two. You just don't want to be that team where Taylor Green goes off, because he is always capable with that skill set of going off and doing some amazing things on the football field. We'll go next to Tier 4. These are teams that I expect to be bowl eligible at season's end, but I don't know just how dangerous they are because there's just too many unknowns surrounding these programs. We'll go next to the Kentucky Wildcats. Now, you look at this team, Zach Calzada comes in. He was an Incarnate Word. He's been at Auburn. He also was the quarterback at A&M when they beat Bama a few years ago. They also have guys back on the offensive line. They also have guys back at the running back spots. So they should be pretty good, I think, running the football. This has been kind of the offseason where Mark Stoops has said, we want to get back to being that physical team that nobody really wants to play. Now, if they can do the things offensively that they were unable to do last year, then that's going to take a lot of the pressure off the defense. And that defense, I think, collectively has a chance to be pretty good. They still have pieces back. They do lose some star power, but they have pieces back at all 3 levels, guys that can really make plays if given some opportunity to kind of gel. Look, 50 new players on this roster, all right? Tons of new faces, tons of chemistry that needs to be cultivated and developed. But I do think Kentucky, if they can get back to their physical roots, will be a tough out for a lot of the teams that they play. They're at Georgia, they're at South Carolina, they're at Auburn, they're at Louisville. Louisville's a big one naturally because Louisville might have playoff aspirations of their own out of the ACC. Ole Miss, Texas, Tennessee, and Florida all come to them. So do I think Kentucky's poised to pull off some upsets this year? I do, especially if they can get back to doing some of the things they did in the first 8, 9, 10 years of Mark Stoops' tenure there in Lexington. Finally, we'll finish things up with Tier 5, and that's teams with work to do. At this point, it's hard for me to envision this team playing in the postseason, but if things fall into place, they can stay healthy and they can make some significant strides, maybe they can find their way to bowl eligibility by getting to 6-6, and it's the Mississippi State Bulldogs. Look, I love Jeff Lebby. I think Jeff Lebby knows exactly what it is he's trying to accomplish. I think Jeff Lebby also knows that it's a challenging situation right now because offensively they should be pretty good. I think they're going to score points. I think Blake Shapen, if he can stay healthy, he's got a chance to be top half quarterback in the SEC, maybe even higher than that if things fall into place at wide receiver and with his supporting cast. So I'm not worried about their offense. I'm really just worried about their defense. They were 126th last year in total defense. That's just not going to be good enough. I think they recognize that. They have so many new players. 80% of their roster have only been with the staff for 1 or 2 years. So that's pretty significant. All right. That takes time. That takes time to get things going. They go out and they bring in some veteran pieces at the wide receiver spot. They got to rebuild along the offensive line. You got to get better defensively across the board. I don't care what category it was. They were among the worst in college football last year. So that group collectively needs to take a significant step forward. I think this team is going to be exciting to watch. I just don't know yet how many stops they're going to get in a 4-quarter football game. You look at some of the schedules. Arizona State at home's a massive one. That's week 2. You also got Southern Miss in week 1. That's on the road too in Hattiesburg. So you got to get both those if you're going to be able to get to bowl eligibility. And Arizona State is a playoff contender, maybe the best team in the Big 12. So that'd be huge as far as the fans and the opportunity there sitting there for the Mississippi State Bulldogs. You also get Texas at home, Georgia at home, Tennessee at home, Ole Miss at home. So if you can get one of those at home, that'd be massive for Jeff Lebby. And then on the road at A&M, at Florida, at Arkansas, at Missouri, if you can get one there as well, taking care of business in the non-conference, maybe you can find your way to bowl eligible. With Arizona State on the schedule, I just don't know if that's one that they can get, not with what Kenny Dillingham and the Sun Devils bring back off last year's surprising playoff run. So I think Mississippi State, the lone team in the SEC, with some work to do in Tier 5. That'll do it for us here at Always College Football. Continue to encourage all of you to like, to rate, to subscribe to the podcast, wherever you get the podcast. We always appreciate those of you that have come to us via the podcast. If you just subscribe, it'll automatically populate in your inbox. And we got lots of exciting stuff coming up. We still have tiers in the ACC, still have tiers in the Big Ten. We're not too far away from giving you our top 25 heading into the season. And to get you prepared, I don't think there's a better place to do it than here with us on Always College Football. For all of us here at ACF, from Mark, Jake, Jack, the other Jack, I'm Greg. We hope you have an amazing day. And remember, it's always college football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.